Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world that you are watching from. So welcome to another live section. Today we are going to be looking at control flow, functions, and OOP. OOP stands for Object Oriented Programming Language, right? Because that is an object oriented programming language. So we are going to be covering this concept in this section, all right? So I want to believe that you already watched the previous section and you jot down your questions, because we are going to be having our Q&A section this Saturday, which is on the 8th of February, and we are going to be having that on Telegram live stream. So I'll be dropping the Telegram link in the description of this section. All right, so you want to make sure you join that section, join the channel, so that you'll be receiving more updates. And yeah, so I don't want to say much, and I'm going to start now. So what we are going to be looking at in today's section is we are going to be looking at loops, right? So there are various types of loops in that. We have like 5 types of loops. We are going to be talking about the standard loop. We are going to be talking about for in loop, for each loop, while loop, and do while loop. All right, so I'm going to break all these loops down for you. Okay, so also we are going to be looking at collections, we are going to be looking at lists, we are going to be looking at maps and sets. I know in the previous section I said a little about list, right, but I did not go in depth. But in this section I'm going to go in depth, show you how to use it properly, and also combine it with the loops, all right, to loop through the list and all that. Okay, and thirdly we are going to talk about functions. Okay, functions are very important when you're writing, building your projects or building your apps, right? So it's another topic that we are going to look at, and I will be covering parameters, return types. I will be covering arrow functions, okay, and also I'll be covering classes, which is the object programming concept, object-oriented programming concept. And we'll be covering classes, methods, and all those stuffs that are objects too that are supported by classes. Okay, then finally in this section we are going to be touching handling exceptions. So if you're building an app, you will definitely come across errors, right? So I'm going to show you how to handle those errors in your that app. Okay, so you don't need to be scared. Okay, so this is pretty much everything you need to know. If you combine it with the first section and this section, this is everything you need to know to get started with that as a Flutter developer. Okay, you can go on and learn other advanced topics, but all these things that I've showed you are the most important things that a beginner needs to get started. So don't joke with it. Okay, take it very serious. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is loops. Okay, so I'm going to quickly run down to my IDE. All right, so in the previous section I showed you guys how to install the VS Code and set up your DAT, right? So, and this was the topics, this was the examples that we did previously. And you can note, if you see here, I know in the previous section my file is going to look different. So what I did, I just included the README, right, just for day 1. Okay, so I'm going to include day 2 later and push it to GitHub. And also I'll be dropping a link, a tutorial link for you guys to go and learn how to use GitHub, because I won't be covering that in this section. I'll drop a tutorial link for you also on the Telegram channel, so you go and see how it's done. I separated everything from type manipulation, variables, operators, data types, okay, just to make it easier for everyone to understand. All right, so now that we are looking at loops, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new file, okay, and I'll call this loops.dat. remember the dat extension. And I told you guys something important, the top level function that you need to create, which is the main function, right? So in today's section we are going to be looking at the standard loop. Let's talk about standard loop first. So you might be wondering, what is a loop? So basically loop is a way that we can iterate or like go through a list. Let's say you want to print multiple items simultaneously, right? You're going to use the loop to do that one after the other. You can loop through a list. You can loop through, let's say you want to generate numbers from 1 to 20, you can do that using the standard loop. So let's do this. We can do something like the pattern of doing loop. Let me just give you guys an example. First, you have the keyword, which is for, okay? Then secondly, you have the variable declaration, okay? Then after the variable declaration, you have the condition. I know I've not taught you guys about condition. That's something I'm going to be talking later. I think that will be the final I think that will be loops conditions. Okay, I think I missed something here. Yeah, control flows. Yeah, I missed something, sorry about that. I'm supposed to touch control flows before touching this one, so let me quickly edit this guy. I missed this one, so sorry about that. So I'm supposed to talk about control flows before moving to any other thing, okay? So very important. So that's what I'm going to be talking about now, control flows. All right, so let's just go back. I will leave these loops like this. I'm going to talk about it later. So let's just create control flow dot, right? It's very important that you know this step before moving to the other one so that you won't get confused. So first thing we need to do is to create our void main. The reason why I'm creating our void main is because these are just separate. I don't want this control flow to be dependent on these other files, okay? So I just want it to be separate. So first thing, what is a control flow? It's a way that we can check for decisions in our app or that program. You want to compare, let's say you want to check if 3 is less than 4, if 5 is greater than, just to like check conditions between two values. If it matches, and then you do something. If it doesn't match, you do something else. So we have the if s. This is more like the if s flow when it comes to checking for conditions, right? So here we have let's say for instance we have a number. I will create a variable of number equal to 10. All right, so here now I can do something like if number, right? Remember I taught you guys operators, so you know that this is conditional operators as well, or equality and all that. So if number is less than, let's say 20, right, you open your square bracket. All right, you open your square bracket. If it's less than 20, okay, you can now print number is less than 20. Okay, in this case 10 is actually less than 20. Then if we run this now, let me quickly click on run, you will see that it's printing this guy, number is less than 20. So you might be asking now, what if number is not less than 20? We are supposed to get a print with an output, right? That's where the x order x block comes in. So inside this s block, you can now run something else that does not satisfy to this condition here. All right, this is the first condition. If number is less than 20, right, if it satisfies to true, then we are going to get this response, number is less than 20. But if it does not satisfy to this value at all, we are going to get this. All right, so if we print this one out now, you're going to see that number is less than 20. That is because this number is less than 20, and once this first case is satisfied, it's not going to execute this one, right, except this first case is not satisfied. Let's change it to greater than, number greater than 20. So guess the output in this case is number greater than 20. Remember the number is 10, right? The variable value is 10. Is 10 greater than 20? The answer is no. So if you look at this code, what you are going to see as the output is going to be this other line x, because this one evaluated to false, so the program or compiler is going to skip it and continue to the second statement. All right, and when you print that, okay, I need to save this. All right, and here you can see number is not less than 20. Okay, this is more like how we can use control flows to check for conditions and all that. You can also do another thing. You can check for multiple conditions, like if you want to satisfy two cases, Remember I told you guys about all and. Okay, you can say if and number is less than 10. So if you are doing and, that means these two cases must satisfy to true, and in this case it's going to give us this response because number is not greater than 20 and number is less than 10. So remember I told you something about and the two cases must evaluate to true before you will get any output inside this first if statement. Okay, so if you run this now, all right, something is wrong here. I don't know, but I'm saving. Try adding blah blah blah. All right, this is correct, and I don't know why it's showing that error. Okay, now the error is gone. So number is not less than 20. That's why we're getting this response. All right, but if we use or to check our condition, remember I told you that or, as long as one case is satisfied, it will not proceed to the other one. It will just print the value, right? Just requires one condition to be satisfied, and then we are good. So if you run it now, you see that number is not less than 20. So it just checks here, number is greater than 20, false. Once it just gets that stuff, it's just going to print this one out for us. Okay, so that's just how it works. And yeah, and number 2 is not less than 10, right? So these two things does not evaluate to true. Number is not less than 10. Let's say equal to now. You will definitely get this one because the first statement is false. It will now jump to the second one. Once it evaluates to true, it's not going to go back to this one. So this is it. Okay, I need to save this. All right, number is less than 20. You can see that. So there are so many things that you can do with control flows. You can use it to check for different values and all that. Okay, so you can also use else if. That's if you want to check for another condition. Else if. So if you are using else if, you will also need to put another conditional statement inside here. Maybe you can say if number is equal to 0, right? It will now print something else again for you. Something like number is less than 0 or something, or equal to 0. So there's a lot of things that you can work with. If we run this will never execute because number is not 0. But let's say we change this value of number to 0, you see that it's going to execute this one for us. All right, okay, I need to save this and let me give this a proper spelling. Number is equal to 0. So this is how you just work with control flows. It's used to check for conditions. If condition evaluates to true, it executes it. If it evaluates to false, it checks the other statement, just like that. Okay, then next thing we need to know about conditions is using the switch statement. This one that I showed you is the if else statement. The second one is switch statement. So this is how switch works. You use the keyword switch, right? Then you put your parentheses. Inside the parentheses, you're going to check the number or the value that you want to check the condition for. All right, so in this case we can use our square brackets, our curly braces, sorry. Then it has something called case. So the first case that you want to check is, okay, let me just tab this. Okay, the first case that you want to check is, instead of using else if number is equal to 0, print number is equal to 0, else if number is this, blah blah blah. What you can do is case 0. This is still the same as this. So you are saying if number is 0, then print number is equal to 0. If number is 10, print number is equal to 10. If is default, maybe number is not 10, number is not 0, then you can just print the default value, which is number is not equal to 0 or 10. So if we save it now, guess what the answer is going to be? It's going to be this one, because number is equal to 0, and this case satisfies to true. All right, I don't know, I need to save this. Why is it not saving automatically for me? So number is equal to 0. Now we are getting the right response. Okay, so this is it, the difference between switch statement and if else statement. These are the only thing that you need to understand conditional flows, right? Conditions in that. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. Also in the Telegram channel, I'm available. Also drop a message, right, to the chat box or in the comment. Okay, depending on when you are watching this video. Now we can now move to the next one, which is loops, right? I know I already said some brief things about loop, which are the standard loop, the for in loop, for each, do while loop, and do while loop. Okay, so now let's work with standard loop. Just like every other programming language like JavaScript and the rest, you will see standard loop a lot. So this is how it is. First, you have the for loop keyword, which is the for. Okay, then secondly, you have your parentheses. Okay, so inside of your parentheses, you have your variable, your initial variable, right? You have your initial variable that you will use, and then you end it with a semicolon, right? Because now it's more like a statement. Okay, then you have your condition, right, that needs to be satisfied, and then we have the increment value to increment the initial value. Now we are incrementing the initial value by 1. Okay, then you have your curly brace where you will now have your code, your block of code, everything will now be here. Okay, so looking at this now, we have the initial value I less than 10, I plus plus. This is an increment operator. I did not talk about it in the previous video, so I expected you guys to take it as an assignment in my previous section to study other operators that are available in that. So if you did that, congrats to you, this won't be an issue. All right, you are one step ahead of every other person. So if you have not done that, you still have time. Make sure you go back and do your research. Okay, so I cannot really cover everything for you, right? You just left for me to give you the foundation, give you the things that are necessary. Then you can now move over to other things that you think are also going to help you as well in your journey. All right, so here we have the for loop keyword, which I'm just following the standard that I commented here. We have the for, we have the initial variable, which is int 1 I. So it doesn't matter, you can use j, you can use initial number, right? You can use any name for the this is a variable, right? You can see from here to here is a standard variable. If we are creating it for, you can create it outside as well and then use it inside. Okay, you can just do it like this. You can create it outside, make sure that this thing is also changing like so. You can create the variable outside and then loop through it. It doesn't matter, it's still going to work. But for this section's sake, I'm going to put everything inside the parentheses. So if I run this code, what is going to happen here is that it's going to print numbers from 0 to 9. So let me put this. If I is less than or equal to 10, it's going to print numbers from 0 to 9. So what happens is this. Initial value is 0, okay? Then it's check the condition. If I is less than or equal to 10, which is correct, 0 is 10, right? It increments it by 1. When you say I plus plus, it increments the value by 1. You also have another one called I minus minus. It decrements the value by 1 as well. It's also the same thing as saying I plus 1, which is the initial value plus 1. Okay, it's just the same thing. So now once it satisfies to true, this is another way of doing conditions control flow as well, but it's different. So just remove your mind from there. This is for loop. Okay, so once you do this, you have your print. Then we are going to print the values as it's coming out. So I'm going to save this and run it so you guys can see the output. So here you can see now we have the values. What is happening here is printing 0, 1 to 10. Okay, so initial value is 0, sorry. So once y1 is less than 0, it will increment it by 1 and then print the initial value, right? Then the for loop will run again and print, it will keep running until this statement, this condition evaluates to false. All right, that's when it's going to stop. Let's say we want this thing to start from 1 instead of 0. You set your initial value to be 1. All right, let me clear this guy. set your initial value to be 1, and when you run it, it's going to start from 1, 2, 3, 4 to 10. Okay, so this is what this is how you do your control flow using standard for loop. You can do a lot of things. Let's say you have your list here. Remember I told you guys about having list of integers. Okay, we have numbers, for instance. Okay, this is me showing you how to loop through a list. So you have a list like this with different numbers, right? So here now, instead of how we can loop through this now is, instead of using this default value of 10, what we can do is numbers.length. So when I get to collections, I'm going to talk more about lists, you know, how to manipulate lists, change the values, get the length and all that. Okay, but for now, just know that we can get the length of this list. It's going to loop through this list and then print out the value for us. So doing it like this is still going to print 1, 2, depending on how many length of these items that we have in the list. So okay, let me save this. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not printing the elements inside the list for us. So if we want it to print the elements inside the list for us, we can access the list item. I know I'm not supposed to talk about this, but we can access the list item like this, right? Once you do this, you can now see that, okay, invalid value, not in exclusive range, blah blah blah. Let's start with 0. There's a reason why this thing showed like this, but I'm not going to talk about it here until we get to collections. Okay, so here you can see, okay, it did not save. Let's start like this. Okay, this should fix it. All right, so we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All the elements inside the list has been printed out. So that's it for standard loop. So let's look at the next loop, which is for in loop. Okay, so how we do for in loop is a different keyword entirely, is a different structure entirely. So we use the in keyword to access the elements of a list that we want to map or loop through. Okay, so we have our for, let's say int, because they are all elements, right? Int number, let's say number in numbers. So I want to get all the number that are in this number. So you use int number in numbers. It's similar thing, so but this one is going to loop through for us. Okay, let's print number. All right, so what this is going to do now is going to give us all the elements inside this number. All right, I don't know why this is not automatically saving. Let's go. Yeah, you can see it's giving us all the values inside this number. This is just the difference between using for in loop and also using standard loop. Okay, so moving on, let's go over to for each loop. So to work with for each loop, we can do something like numbers, right? The list that we want to loop through, the item that we want to loop through. And mind you, it must not be integer. We can also have strings, right? We can have strings as the data type of the list. Okay, I'm just using random words here, so don't just using random words. You need to change this guy to string, and let's call this one names. Okay, so what we can do now, if we are using for loop, for each, remember I changed this name doesn't mean that it's not going to work for this one as well. We can change the names what we are looping through, right? Change this data type to string because all these values are strings already. Okay, so if you run it, it's not going to give us any error, rather it's going to print out all these elements in the list. Okay, so don't get confused. So I'm going to go back to how it was before. So now talking about the for each loop, we have names dot for each. Okay, so this for each, you can see it takes a function with the value, right? And then it takes function with the value and then action. You can just do something like for each print. The reason why I'm using for each print is because print is always a function. Okay, I know this is going to be a little bit complex, but just know that if we run something like this, is a function, is going to work. But the standard way, let's say we have our for, you can, one thing about that, right, you can hover on any method to see how it's used, the documentation and all that. So looking at this now, we can do something like this, okay, since it's a function, right? And for each, we can just have a value like this, or we can call it name, okay? So inside this name now, we can go ahead and print hello name and hello name. Okay, so this is called string concatenation. It's more like if you want to have a variable like hello, you want to put another, you have a string, you want to put a value inside, use the $sign before the variable, okay, behind the variable to just do it there. I'm supposed to talk about this in our previous sections, but yeah, so I'll just, so sorry about that. And this is name, hello name. So we can just run this now. You're going to see that it's going to give us hello, the first name, DK, FK, DY, DF, and it has the second name and all that. So this is how you use for each in terms of looping through an item, okay? And yeah, that's it for, we have talked about standard loop, we have talked about for in loop, we have talked about for each loop. So let me just put this as a comment. All right, so the next one, which is the fourth one that we have here, is the while loop. Okay, so I hardly use while loop in my projects. Yeah, it's especially except maybe when I'm working with database, especially SQLite and all that. I just want to go through all the database. I use while loop a lot. And so how it works is it's still the same thing as using if-else statement, but while loop, it works as for loop because it loops through the items as a whole. So how it works is, first we have our y keyword, okay, then we can say y names, right? Let's say dot length is less than let's say if is greater than 0. All right, so you can see what is happening here now. Y names dot length is greater than 0. We are using the keyword while, and then we have the condition. If names dot length is greater than 0, in this case name dot length is what, 1 2 3 4 5 6. This is 6. The length of this is 6. All right, so that means names dot length is greater than 0. So what we can do here now is to do something like all right, names minus let's say names dot length minus 1, okay, and then we can now go ahead and print names dot length. So what is happening here now is we have a condition that checks if names is greater than 0. Make sure, be careful about this condition, because most times while loop can run continuously if the value evaluates to true, like there's no way to stop it, and it might freeze your system. So be careful when you're writing while loop functions, okay, or while loop statements. Be careful about it. So I'm just being careful here, because while names.length is greater than 0, what I'm doing, I'm reducing the length by 1 so that we get to 0, and then this execution is going to stop. Okay, once it evaluates to, once it's not greater than 0, this is going to stop and the execution will end, instead of running continuously to hang my system. All right, especially when you're using a system with low configuration, you have to like either restart your device, shut it down and all that, so be careful. All right, I'm going to save this and run it now. You can see what happened here. I think okay, I just made a mistake here. So you can see what is happening. This thing is running continuously. It's running continuously, right? You can see it's running continuously. 6 is just running, which is the length, right? So we're just running, and yeah, we need to find the, to stop this. You can just click on the stop here to stop execution. But you can see itself, the stop is not working, right? And yeah, it just stopped now. Whoa, that was a lot. That was a lot. So imagine if my system was not too strong, right? See where it stopped. So I think my condition here is not correct. So I'll just have to like fix that. So what we can do, let's say instead of using numbers or length, let's use a variable int number equal to 0. Okay, so here I can do something like if number, right, is equal to 10. If it's not equal to 10, all right, we want to print numbers, right? Then while we are printing it, we are incrementing it by 1. So once this number gets to 10, okay, once it gets to 10, it stops. Okay, let's say if numbers is less than 10, all right, what happens? It will keep printing the value of number, right, until it gets to 10. The condition is going to stop. So let's run this and see. You can see here it starts from 0, right? It checks the condition. Number is less than 10, which is true. It prints it out. It prints the initial number, and then it increments the number by 1. Okay, once it has done that, it will now rerun again. Once it increments number by 1, number automatically becomes 1. Okay, 0 plus 1 becomes 1. It will check again, print it, increment it by 1. So now we have 1 plus 1, which is 2. You can see the output is printing. Once it gets to 9, which is 9 is less than 10, you can see the execution. All right, where was I? Yeah, on the while loop. So I know you might notice some changes in my screen. So I just switched from the bigger screen to the smaller one. So, right, let me increase this a little. All right, so here with the while loop is basically, it has a condition. It runs continuously as long as the condition evaluates to true. Once the condition is true, which is this condition here, it keeps running, and we have a statement here to just increment the value while it keeps running and all that. Okay, so that's one thing about a while loop, different from for loop. For loop just runs based on the initial condition that you gave it. Okay, once it satisfies it, it stops. But this one, it just keeps incrementing. It's more like it's adding the values for you while the program is running. Okay, but for list, you already defined the length, the duration that it's going to take before it stops. But while loop, it's not like that. It just keeps running. So that's why you need to make sure that your condition will eventually end. Okay, assuming we did not have something like this now, this plus plus, right, this condition is going to run forever. Okay, until you restart your system. So that is it for while loop. Let's look at the final one, which is the do while loop. So do while loop is different from while loop. Okay, while loop, you can see we check for the condition before incrementing the value. But in the case of do while loop, we first of all run the statement. Let's just say print. We are still using this value of int number. Okay, print number, right, and then we can now do number plus plus. All right, while we can now use the keyword y is less than. Okay, we can now do this. So you can see the difference. While loop, we check for the condition first before running the statement or any other thing that we want to run and increment the value. But in do while loop, we first of all increment the value. Okay, we increment the value first. In this case now, it's going to start from 1. We increment the value first before checking for the condition. All right, that's the difference, yeah, between the both of them. So I'm going to run this now. You can see now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so what is happening? Number is equal to 0, and number without incremented it by 1 before printing it out. You can see what is happening here. Then while loop, it will now check for the condition. So do while, first of all, evaluates the statement, like, or print, execute any logic that we want before checking for the statement. All right, so give me 1 second. Let me reconnect my monitor. All right, I just reconnected it to a full screen. So here so I just talked about do while loop. Okay, that's pretty much everything you need to know about loops. So yeah, I'm going to end that particular topic, yeah, here. So I've been able to cover standard loop. I've been able to cover for in loop. I've been able to cover for each loop, while loop, and do while loop. All right. So the next topic on our list is collections. Okay. So I'm going to talk more about list. Then list, I'm going to talk about maps. Sets, I won't be really be talking much about it because it's a little bit similar with list, but I'm just going to give an example. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to give another example. So here now, I'm going to create a new file and I'm calling these collections. Okay. Dot that. Okay. We still have our void main. So first thing we want to look at is list. Remember I already talked about list in the previous section. And I'm just going to break it down here. So list, as I told you, works based on data types. Okay. So one list cannot have it cannot have more than one item, like more than one data type in it. So declaring a list, we have a list. First, you have your lowercase, right, to just put the data type that the list is going to have. So here is more like us creating an initial list. We can remove that. You can put new if you want, but I don't really like that thing. So let's replace this. No, we are going to have something like this. What this means now, this is us creating a variable list of names. We are creating an initial variable of a list. And in this case, this list is empty, completely empty. Why? Because there is no element inside the list. So whatever you see inside the list, those are elements. So as you can see in this example, there's no element. So if we do something like, let's say, let's introduce our control flow now into this section. So say if list of name dot is empty, right? We are using control flow now. You can see that you can do a lot of things with list and control flow. List of names is empty. We can now print and say, okay, let's just say object not found. That means nothing is inside, right? Because it's empty completely. That means there is nothing inside of it. Else, we can now do something else and say objects found. All right. So if I save this now and run it, you're going to see that we are going to get the right response, objects not found. That means there is nothing inside. But if I decided to put one name inside here, now let me say destiny, okay? What we are going to see now is going to be object found because it's no more empty. That means this first condition has evaluated to false. So it will not check the else statement, okay? That's it for combining control flow with elements. All right. And another thing again, let's assume we created an initial list that is empty, right? So I can say list is more like it's a collection type that we use to hold values, multiple values of the same data types. And those values can either be unique or they cannot be unique. So when I say they can either be unique or not, we can have destiny inside a list, first name. We can also have another destiny inside a list. We can have multiple destinies inside a list. All right. That means you can have non-unique names inside a list or non-unique elements or values inside a list is accepted. Okay. All right. So let's assume we have all these. We have Destiny, Treasure, David, Michael, John, and all that. Okay, let's just take that. Let's just say we have all those names inside our list, right? So now I want to print that list. I can know list of names. See what happens. It will just give us the list of all those names, right? We can also do the same thing if we are using our control flow. I'm just trying to combine all those things together before I teach you how to manipulate lists and assign new values to a list. So we can use our control flow and say list, let's say string in list of name. string name in list of name, we can now print name. Okay, something like this. If you save it, it's going to print all the names accordingly, just as they are inside this list. Okay, so that's it for list. Let's move on. Yeah, let's move on. And just below here, I'm going to have list of names. Okay, so now what I want to show you now is how to assign, or how to know the length of this list. Remember, in list, in our normal algebra class in school, we start counting from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? But in programming, we start counting from 0. So when you see these elements now, someone asks you how many elements are inside this list. In your mind, it will be like, let's say each of these, okay, let me start with something else. Each of these, how many, what's the length of this list? When you start counting, you count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're correct. In programming, you are correct. In algebra, in real life, you're correct. Then if you come back now and someone asks you, represent these integers, or represent these names based on their index, right? You might want to say this is the first index, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you represent it like that, in real life, you're correct. But in programming language, you're wrong. So in programming language, index starts from 0. You start counting from 0. So when you say, how many index are here? You can say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 index, all right? So this is the last index. If you say you want to access each of these index one after the other and then print it out, you access them, you access elements in a list based on their index, okay? So first, let me show you how to get the length. This is the length. It's going to give us length of 5, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, let's say you want to get the index. I want to get destiny, right? If you say destiny is at index 1, okay, and run it, it's going to give you something else. It's going to give you treasure, because treasure is not at index where destiny is supposed to be. It's at index 1 when you start counting from 0, 1, okay? But when you want to get destiny, you need to use 0, because it's the initial value which starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so if I run this now, what I'm getting is destiny. Okay, so this is just how you access items in a list. You have the list variable, the name, then you put your square bracket, and then you put the index inside to access it. So let's say we want to access 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are 4 index. Let's say we want to access 5. 5, this is more than, if we access 5, we are out of scope, right? So let's say I access 5. 5 is not part of this element. There's no index with number of 5 here. There's no element with an index of 5. So if I run it, there will be an error, which is range error, invalid value, not in inclusive range. So when you get an error like this, that means you are trying to access an index or an element that does not have the specified index in that list. Okay, so you need to know what you want to do. If you want to access the last one, you can just use 4 if you know the index. You remember I showed you how to access the first one and the last one. Okay, so let's just assume that this is a dynamic list and you do not know how many items are inside. You don't know the index and all that, but you want to access the first one and also you want to access the last one. What you can do, when you go to list here, you click on dot, you'll be able to access a lot of objects that are available for that list. I showed you guys this thing when we were doing string manipulation, right? So if you click dot, you'll be able to see that it has a lot of things. You can add new list item to a list. You can reverse the list. So if you reverse it now, John becomes 0, just like that. So play around with this thing. I'm not going to show you guys this. So play around with it. So when you do first name dot first, what is going to happen is you're going to print the first element in this list, which is destiny. So if you do list of name dot last, you're going to get the last element in the list, which is John. All right. So let's say now we want to add a new element inside this list and then print it out. Now, if we print it out, what we are seeing is just what we have already predefined. Okay. So let me close this, and to assign a new value, to add a new item inside this list, we can use list of names dot add, then you put in the string of element that you want to add. Let's say Josh. Okay. And when we run it now, you can see that Josh has automatically been appended into this list. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And now we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 index in total in this list. So you can also remove an item. Let's say we have list.name.remove. You need to know what you're removing. So what are you removing? Let's say we want to remove Destiny from this list. Okay. Now see what happens when we click. You can see now we have treasure. First of all, we added Josh. Josh has been added, and then we remove Destiny. You can see that Destiny is no more part of the list. This is how you remove elements from a list. Okay. Then next we can have other manipulations where we can have remove art. Maybe if you have a specific index, maybe you don't want to use remove to remove the name. You don't know the name. You just want to remove based on index. If you want to remove the last elements, fine. But if you say remove art, you have to specify the index that you want to remove, right? You can say 0, 1, 2, 3, or whatsoever. Okay. So looking at this now, what we did here is first we added Josh into the list, right? Then secondly, we remove Destiny. Immediately we remove Destiny, right? Treasure becomes the 0 index automatically, right? Then we now remove at 0. That means we remove treasure for the list. What we are going to get is David, Michael, John, and Josh that we added. This other 2 has been removed. Now you can see the output giving us exactly what we did. All right, and I think we have other things again. You can assign, let's say you can change the value of, okay, let me remove all these things now instead of adding. Let me run it. I've changed them to default. Okay, instead of removing it, let me just comment it because this will be needed later. So what I can do now, let's say this Destiny, I don't want to remove it, but I want to replace the name to something else. Okay, like I want to change the name, replacing, but I still want to retain that same index. So what I can do is to say list.name, there use your square brackets, specify the index that you want to change. Let's say this is 0. I want to change Destiny. You're going to change the name now to Chris, right? And close it. So now if we run it, we are not going to see Destiny again. Now the name will be replaced to Chris. Now you see we have Chris, Treasure, David, Michael, and John, right? So that's how we just use to manipulate lists. There's a lot of things. So go ahead and, study it and do your research more to get more ideas. But these ones that I'm showing you are more like the most important things that you need to know. You might be asking now, okay, what about I want to clear this list? It's very easy. When you do list dot, you have a method called clear. You can see you can use it to also clear the list. If we run this thing now, it's going to print out an empty list for us. Here you can see we have empty list because we have cleared everything from the list using this simple call. All right. So that's pretty much it. And there's a lot of things to explore when it comes to list. You can check if it contains a particular number if you want to do it for conditional flows and all that. You can check first. You can do for loop. I already showed you guys for loop. You can insert an element in a specific area, similar with what we just did here. All right. So there's just a lot. Okay. So that's pretty much it about working with lists and manipulating lists, creating lists and all that. So the next thing on our list now is map. Okay, let's talk about sets before going to map. So just like list, map cannot contain, remember this Destiny now, we have Destiny here. We can decide to create another Destiny here in a list. But when it comes to a set, all the elements inside must be unique. So we use this set, let's say string, then we have set of names. And here you can also declare simple set. You can see the difference between set and list is that set is defined is enclosed using square brackets, but in the case of list is enclosed using a block brackets. Okay. So it's used to for set is curly braces, while for list is a square bracket. So here we can define, let's say we have our first name Destiny, let's say we have destiny. You can see here almost the same thing, but one is showing us element warning. And if you look at the warning here, it's saying that two elements in a set shouldn't be equal. Change or remove the duplicate elements. That means set cannot contain duplicate elements. The elements must be unique. See, for list is not showing us that error, but for set is showing us that error. So that's one thing you need to take note of. So you can remove it and you can see the error is gone. You must have only unique set of elements inside a set. So manipulating it is almost the same thing as list. Okay, so if you understand list, you will definitely understand set. But just know that set doesn't contain duplicate elements that are the same. All right, so you need to know what you're doing. Even though you use int, let's say you change the value to 1, 2, 3, then you want to use another 3 again. Let's say you want to use another 3 again, 4, 4. You can see the warning that is showing, right? It's showing us that warning. So you want to be careful not to. So you normally need to use sets whenever, if you want to, like, if you want the elements not to be duplicates, like you don't want them to contain any duplicate elements, use sets for it. They can use, you can still use list, but maybe you have to filter it out to remove duplicate elements. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for those two guys. Then the next thing that we have on our list is the map. All right, so map basically is it's more like a collection, but it has key value pairs. It supports key value pairs. So let's say we have a map like this that we want it to, first you need to be, since I said that it contains key value pair, the key, always make sure the key is a string, because for good practice, let the key always be string, because if you use the key as the identifier, just as list we use the index as the identifier, that's what we are going to do with key. We use the keys as the identifier. All right, so just more like when you're in school now, you have your matric number, or you have a specific ID that they used to know you in school. All right, in your class you have a specific ID or something like that, a code, and three persons in that class might also have the same names. Okay, so if you're identifying people based on their names or their value, you are wrong, right? Because you might have two people with the same name and you'll be confused, you don't really know the right person to call. So that's why a unique key is always assigned to identify everybody. If I call you based on that unique key, even though we have like 10 people with the same name, as long as their keys are not the same, the right person is going to respond. So that's just similar with what we have with key map, working with key value pair. So first you have the string. Let me just use string, okay? You can use string dynamic and all that, or string integer. So let's say map of students. Okay, you can have something like this. It starts with this square bracket. This curly brace is just like set. So remember I told you that it has a key, right? So we have our ID. This is the key, very unique. Okay, then the ID is 0 for the first person. Okay, then we have the name, which is Destiny. So here you can see now we have two key, 1, 2. The ID, which is the key, whenever we call this ID, it's going to print out this value for us. Then we have the name, also the ID. Whenever we call this name, it's going to print out all the names that are in that list. You can also add more values. Let's say department or occupation and all that. You have it as key occupation. You can now say developer. Okay, so this is pretty much how you just use your key value pairs, all right, to just define maps. All right, you can also, just the way we are looping through list, we can also loop through maps. All right, but we can do map, right, dot entries dot let's say we want to get the first entry. It's going to give us what we need. If we say dot first, right, it's just going to give us the first entry, but assuming this was a list, map of maps, that's when you're going to, I don't want to go in depth, right? But let's just say we have our map up of students, we are able to get if to know if it's empty, because a list can also be defined as an empty list. Sorry, a map can also be defined as an empty map, right, without any values. So when we do, you remember the same thing that we did for list where we checked if it's empty. It's also the same thing that's going to work with map as well. Okay, it's just the same way of manipulation and all that. All right. Then we have, you can add all, you can add more entry, you can clear it, you can check if it contains key. And when it say if it contains key, which is 0, it's going to print out the ID for us and all that. You can check if it contains value, a specific value, it's going to print out the value for us. So that's just it. You can do a lot of things with map. But now let me show you something. I want to iterate through this map. So I will show you how it's going to print out whenever we run it. First, let me print this guy out. Map of string. You can see how it's printing out for us. So let's say we can have a list of map. Okay, we can have a list like this. Instead of having this, we can say okay, let's have something like list of map, right? String. So we can say list of students. Then you have a list, just the way we have for list of strings, where we have a string that will put all the string inside. For list of map, what we just have to do is to define the maps inside one after the other, and each of them will be separated by comma. The same thing that we did for list, separated by comma. So here now, let's say we have the first one. Okay, let me remove this. Okay, we have the first ID. Then I can now create another second one. Okay, make sure the IDs are unique, very important, and make sure the keys are the same thing, right? If you're creating additional items, make sure the keys, don't go and have ID here, you now have another one like this, ID, uppercase. They are not the same, right? Make sure they match, right? But the values, you can change them to anything. You can change them to anything, right? You can change them to anything. All right, the value can be changed to anything, it doesn't matter. If we run this list of map now, it's going to give us a list of all those items, right? So let's say we want to loop through this list and only print out the name of the students. So we can do for let's say map in list of students. Let's say students, list of students. We can now print students. Now, what do we want to access? Just the same way that we are accessing strings when we are accessing the index and all that. That's the same way we're going to access it here. We can just say student, square brackets, then you put the key that you want to access, which is, let's say, name. Make sure it's in form of a string, and you put the name here. So if we run this, we are going to see Destiny and Destiny Ed, because those are the names inside the map. So watch this. You can see we have Destiny, Destiny Ed. So let me say I want to only access the occupations. I will just have to put in the occupations here and run it. I'm just like specifying what exactly that I want to achieve. So you can see we have the developer and DevOps developer. Okay, so that's pretty much it, and how you can manipulate some lists, sets, and map. All right, so I've broken down the most important things that you guys need. Okay, so if you have any questions too, remember the Telegram channel is there, and also tell me in the chat section, and also tell me in the comment section as well, depending on when you're watching this video. Then the next thing we want to look at now is the functions. Sorry, we want to look at functions. I'm going to talk about parameters, return types, and arrow functions. All right, so right here I'm going to create function.dat. This void main that we keep creating every time is also a function. Okay, but it's a void function. So functions can return an integer, functions can return a string, function can return anything. It can return dynamic data. Okay, and functions, once declared, we can only invoke it or call it before we can access it. And I wouldn't advise you to create function inside this void main. You can create function outside the void main, but when you want to execute that function, you must call it inside the main top level main function. All right. So let's say we have a function that only prints name. Okay. Let's say we have, since it prints only name, we can have it like void because we don't want to return any value. It's not returning any name, rather it's printing name. So we have give name, right? So function has, first thing first, let me just explain. It has the return type, right? The return type can be a string, it can be void, which is nothing. It can be dynamic, which means it can return anything, string, integer, or whatever. It can be integer, it can be bool, right? It can be a list, it can be a map, it can be a set, all right? But I will not be covering all these ones. I will just cover string and integer, right? Then you can go on and learn. So once we have this return type, the next thing we are going to have here is the name of the function, which is function name. Once we have that function name, we have a parenthesis. Okay, most times you will see parameters. Remember I told you that we're going to talk about parameters. You can see things like parameters inside the function name. This is how you declare it. I'm going to talk about it too. Once you have your function name, right, you put the parenthesis, and if there is no parameter, is fine. You don't need to put anything inside. Then finally we have our curly brace. Okay, you don't need any end statement like this, so you just need your curly brace. So let me show you how it's done. Give name, we have our parentheses. Okay, then we can now put our square brackets. So inside this function we can now print my name is Destiny. Okay, it's just similar with this void main function that we have. But if we run this app now, if we run this code, nothing is going to print out for us. The reason is because we have not called this given name. So what we need to do here is just to call give name, close it. Okay, this is how you invoke it. Give name and your brackets. All right, guys, give me a second. Let me just grab water. All right, I'm back. Okay, I was talking about give name, so I just triggered it now. So calling a function by name is called invocation. We are trying to invoke it, call it, okay? So now if I run it, since it's called inside this void main, we are going to see the correct output. All right, I did not save this. Let me save this and run it. Now you see that we have my name is Destiny. Now it's triggering this guy for us, okay? So this is how it works. You can also have something like void sum. So you can say 4 plus, let's just say print. Okay, let's first of all declare a variable int sum equal to 4 plus 4, right? This is me combining operators, variables, and data type, okay? So we can now do print sum, all right? If we run this code, this is not going to get triggered because we have not called it. So we can now call it inside here, sum. And mind you, we can call a function inside a function, okay? First, let me call this now. It's giving us 8. Let's say I don't want to call it here. I only want to call it once this give name is called. what I can do, I can invoke it inside the give name function. All right. And if I call this, you can see it's giving us the same response. So you can call a function inside a function, so it won't give you any error, right? But let me use this method, okay? But now let me show you guys one other thing. I just showed you now how to declare functions, okay? Now let me show you how to pass a parameter. In this case, let's say now we want to define another parameter now, or we want to print another name of, I want to have, my name is Destiny, and also I want to have, my name is David, right? In that case, what happens, I will now have to put another print statement inside here. And if I call it, we will now have multiple print statements. If I want to do another name, I'll have another names just like that. And it's going to make my code look messy, right? That's where parameter comes in, which I talked about, parameters, okay? So in that parameter, we don't need to do all this anymore. Rather, I can just, and we have two types of parameter. We have the standard positional parameter, right? And named parameter. So let me use the normal one first before I talk about named parameter. Let me use the positional parameter. So we have our name, string, name, because that's what I want to pass. So where I'm using string, you can change the data type to integer depending on how you want your function to work. But I'm going to show you guys when we start working on sum. I'm going to show you how to use the integer or double. Here we have our string name. And previously I talked about string concatenation and string interpolation, okay? So here let's interpolate this thing. So what I'm going to do is use the $sign and then pass in the name here, right? So you can see now we are getting error here. One positional argument expected by give name, but zero found. So try adding the missing argument. So in this case now we have our void give name. We have a parameter that takes the name that you want to be given. Then we'll print it out, okay? So in this case now what happens? If you hover on it, you can see this is a string. That means we need to use our quote and let's say Destiny, all right? Let me clear this. And now I'm going to run it. My name is Destiny, right? It's all right. So that's pretty much it. Now, if it's still giving us the same thing, oh yeah. So now if I want to print more names, I just have to like call this method again. And let's say I put David, and it's also going to give us the same thing. My name is David. My name is David. All right. And if I decide to have a list, let me quickly locate where we have our collections previously. Let's say I have a list like this, okay? And if I come back here and put this list of names now, I want to show you guys how to combine for loop and all that. So we can do something like for var, let's just use dynamic, or let's use our type name in list of names. What I can do now, I can now print, or I can just call the give name function and then pass in the name. So what happens here, you're just going to loop through this list of names and then to now print it out for us as a function. So now we don't need to be typing the things one after the other and all that. So you can see how simple it is combining parameters with a function and also combining a list and for loop, everything together, right? When I print it out, you can see now we are having my name is Destiny, my name is Destiny, because we have two destinies here. My name is Treasure, my name is David, Michael, and John. You can see how we looped through it and gave us the correct values, the namings that we want. And mind you, we can also have more than two parameters in a function. In this case, I have string. I can have something like type, maybe occupation, right? I can also have something like another string again of, let's say, int of age, right? It doesn't really matter. You can have multiple parameters. But in this case now, if you notice, this parameters is looking a little bit confusing because let's say you're starting now, you may not really know which is which. This is more like positional parameter. If you make a mistake and say you put occupation to be here, because they are all strings, right? Developer, and you also now came here and put Destiny and came here and put your age, right? Let's say you made a mistake, you interchanged it, but whereas from the positions, name is supposed to come first, but because they are of the same data type, it did not give us any error. You might make that mistake and interchange it. So let me just say my name is name. I work as a, then you interpolate it as well. Occupation, right? I work as a, right? Then you say, and I am age years old. Okay. If we run it now, because we interchange this value, you can see what it's showing. My name is developer. I work as Destiny, as a Destiny, and I am 4 years old. It's not correct. Okay. So that's one disadvantage of using position parameters, except we change this guy now to correspond like this. That's when we are going to get the accurate value. All right, that's when we are going to get the accurate value. So if I run it now, it's going to give us the correct value. My name is Destiny. I work as a developer and I am 4 years old, just depending on the age, right? Okay, let me show you something else called named parameter, which is something I use a lot. I really love it. So you can just use something like curly braces to begin with. Then at the end too, you put your curly braces to begin with. And since is you have the required keyword to make this guy required, you have this one to be required, you also have this one to be required. So the only difference here is that when you hover on it, you can see now it's showing us that the name parameter name is required. So all these things are required. So what happens is this: if we want to declare this, we first of all, we don't need to make the mistake of interchanging it. We need to put name. This is telling us that, okay, this is name. So we know what we should know what is going to go here. Then we have develop occupation. It's going to tell us what is going to go here. Then we have age. It's going to tell us too what is going to go here. You can see how this one is different. If you maybe interchange this developer to this one, that means you are the cause. You did not pay attention to your code, right? To know where that this name is not supposed to carry developer or occupation or whatever. Okay. Now, if we run it, it's still going to give us the same thing. The only thing that changed is just that it's no more positioned anymore. It's now in form of a name parameter. So when we talk about name parameter, it doesn't matter. This name can also come last, right? But because of you are sticking with the named parameter, it's not going to give any error. It can come last, it can come to the middle or whatsoever. It shouldn't be as this one is, okay? Another case again, let's say you don't want it to be, you want it to be null somehow. Okay, I did not talk about this operator, but this is nullable operator. You don't want this age to be required. That means users can maybe decide not to put it. That's where you use this null. You remove the required keyword from it. But for run it, we are going to be getting null as a response. Okay, and you can decide to handle null in your case. That's where string interpolation comes in as well, where you use your square brackets, curly braces, and age. This is used when you want to run a specific function or like a condition inside a string, right? You use your square brackets. You can use your null. So if age, what this is saying is if age is equal to null, right? If it's null, then just return a default age. Okay, that's what is happening. If it's null, return a default age. So if we run it now, you can see the response here is going to be 6 because age is null. But if we added age here to be 10, this is not going to check because age is not null. This is another type of conditional flows too. Okay, let me save that. All right, you can see now age is 10. So this is not going to be this is not going to get triggered because age is no more null. All right, so that's it for writing name parameters and also positional name parameters and positional parameters. So lastly, let's look at arrow functions. The difference between arrow function is that it does not have this, you don't require these curly braces. This is called a block function, right? It's called a block function. This is the body. All right, so if you want to work with let's say we have void, let's say we have a function. Yeah, I think, yeah, let's say we have a function of, let's use this one for example now, int sum 4 plus 4. So I want to use sum here. What I'm going to do here now is void sum. You put this guy, they use your arrow function, right? Then you can now do print 5 plus 5. Okay, just like this. You can see just a one line code, just one line. Use your function, but the disadvantage of this now is that unlike give name, you can decide to do other print statement inside the block body. You cannot do the same thing for function. Function just takes only one return statement or whatever you are doing. Okay, but you can convert it to block if you want, where you can now have the access to create a variable, initial variable of a number right before you run it. But aside that, this is just how arrow function works, right? You can call it fat arrow in other programming languages like JavaScript. So here we have our sum, where if we call this sum, it's just going to give us the response. So it's just similar stuff, but the difference is that we cannot write any additional variable inside of fat arrow function. Okay, now let's talk about return type. So let's say we want to get this sum now. Return type, this is void. Return type must have a data type. So let's say we want to have a function that returns the sum of any number that we pass to it. Or let's say we want to return odd number from any given numbers, all right? So we're going to have something like int. First define the return type. Then we have give odd numbers, right? Then we have a parameter. First, we have number 1 and number 2. Okay, now we are not going to print the data inside here. So what we are going to do instead is to say if okay, let's just return the product of two numbers. What we are going to do is just to do return number 1 multiplied by number 2, right? The argument type string. Okay, number is not supposed to be a string, rather we can make it to be an integer. All right, so what this is happening now, we are returning the product of these two numbers. Initially, if you notice, we were printing it out, we were printing the value, but in this case we are returning it. And you can also have a print inside the method, right? It's not going to give any error, but make sure that it's not after the return statement. If you put it after the return statement, it automatically becomes a dead code. That means the compiler is not going to see it, it's not going to execute it. So return should be, whatever you're putting should be before the return. Okay, so this return is mostly useful when you're using, let's say you're using your fat arrow function, just like this. Yeah, using your arrow function and you don't intend to run any variable inside. This is where it's useful, right? So what is happening here, give product numbers. We have number 1, number 2, then you return number 1 asterisk number 2. So this keyword, this arrow function, is the same thing as using return inside a block function. Okay, so once you have done this, now if you come here and say, let's call it give product names, it will now tell us to add the first number and the second number. If we run this thing, nothing is going to happen. Let me just remove these guys, let me comment them. If we run this, nothing is going to happen. The reason is because we did not really specify, we did not print out this method out. So what we can do now, just to create this as a variable and say product equal to give product name, and then we can now print product. All right, and when we run it, you can see now it's giving us 12 and 12 because it's returning this value back to us, and then now we are using it the way we want inside here. You can also manipulate it a little and say product plus 4, and yeah, that is 12 plus 4, which is going to give us 16. So product plus 4, this did not work. So we can do, let's say int new number. right? Then we just print out the new number here. Now we have 16. All right. So this is just the difference between having return type, having parameters, and return type is more like a method that we want to reuse over and over again. Maybe its purpose is just to perform one specific thing. Like this method now is only used to perform products, two numbers, right? To give us multiply two numbers. So whenever we call it, if you call another one here, let's say product 2, is always going to return. You give it a new number, right? And you say product 2 is also going to give us the product of those two numbers. So it's just more like function that you want to reuse over and over again in your program. You use functions. Function is very good. It helps you to reuse methods. You don't have to be writing the same code every time. Just create a function for it. Anywhere you need it, whenever you want to use it, you just call the function. And one other thing again, even though this function is not in this file, let's say it's inside, let's say it's in another file entirely, but not inside this void main, let's say it's in another file entirely, right? We can still reuse that method inside this file. It's just by importing it. Once you click this light bulb here, you click on it, it's going to tell you to import library collections.dat, because this method give product numbers is inside collections.dat. So now we can make use of it while it's not inside our file. Okay, we can still make use of it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Okay, even though you run it, it's still going to give us the same thing. All right, so let me go to collections and remove this guy. Okay, what do we have on our list? We have classes and object-oriented programming, so OOP. So we're going to talk about classes, how to initialize class and also how to create objects inside class. So you can just see class as a blueprint, right? Let's just call it as a blueprint of an object. So let's say, for instance, you have your house. Your house is your class, okay? And inside that house, you have a lot of things. You have your keys, let's say your key is there, you have your furniture, you have your television set, you have your washing machine set, you have your kitchen sets and all that. When you, it's the same thing with class. So whenever you want to access those things inside of your house, you need a key. And because you're the rightful owner, you use the key to enter. And the process of using your key to enter is what we call instantiation or initialization of classes in that. So once you open it with your key and enter, you are getting all your properties. You are seeing all your properties. So those are called objects. You are seeing all your objects, or your method, or your variables and all that inside that class. And you can also reuse a class later, just the same way we used our functions. Okay. And to declare a class, we need to start with the class keyword, then the class name. Let's call this dog, right? And then you pass your parameter, uh, parentheses. But before I create the class, let me first of all create our most important thing, void main, because we need to call this. So inside this class now, I can have a function. You can have variables, you can have fields, objects, and all that inside a dog. There are so many things that a dog can do, right? A dog can bark, a dog can walk. So inside here, we can have a method called bark. Okay, this is us creating a function. Then we can now print it out and say it just more like remember I told you that is a blueprint that contains a lot of things. So you have your house that contains your property, kitchen, everything. You can do a lot of things. You can watch TV, you can hit the gym inside your house, you can walk and all that. So when you have a dog, you put in the functions of a dog, which is bark. A dog can bark, right? You can also create another function inside that same class to say walk, a dog can walk. All right. So these are just functions that you have inside your class. So if you want to access these functions, now that's when you now create the instance variable of that class. It's more like you using your key into your house. Okay. So you can have final dog instance, right? Then you can now use the dog class name, which is this name, to initialize it. So in order for you to be able to access any property inside this dog class, you just have to call dog.back. Okay, so what happens if you run it, it's going to print it out for you. A dog can bark. You can also do the same thing and say dog instance dot walk, right? And it's going to print it out for you as well. Dog can walk, dog can bark. All right. Also inside your class, you can have variables. You can have int variable equal to walking. Or I'm using, let's just say dog name. Let's just say Texas, the dog's name. Then you can now actually access the name of the dog inside there using the dog instance dot dog name, right? And for you to get the results, maybe you can just use your print dog name. All right. We can print it out. You can see Texas is printing out. So it's just used to create a lot of instances for a particular logic or function that you want to create. You can have your functions, you can have your feeds variables inside and all that. So we can also do my dog, let's say my dog, let's do string concatenation, is barking. All right. If we run this, you can have my dog Texas is barking because we just passed in the name. Okay. Now let's assume we want to, whenever we call this back, we want to give it a specific name entirely. All right. You're going to understand more about classes once we get to Flutter, a lot of it. So once you have a dog name, right now, just when we created our functions, we did not create parameters initially. You can see that we were just creating different names for our dog and all that. But in this case, let's say now we want to create another additional dog name. We want to be passing it whenever we call these methods. What we can do, because function can take a parameter, we can just pass the parameter here and say name, right? So we are talking about that. Okay, we can just pass the parameter and say name. Instead of passing dog name directly, we can say name, and here we can just say Kira, Kira, anyone. Once you run it, you're going to see my dog Kira is barking. You can also call it as many times as you want. My dog Rambo, right? Things like that. So it's just similar with what we already have in functions, okay? So you can just pass your parameters to the function. But if you don't want it that way, you want the name of the dog to be called once the user initializes the variable. What we can do here is to create a constructor. So we can use string dog real name. I want to make it different from this one, right? Dog real name. You close it, and now you can see it's showing us error. All right, so just ignore that error. What we are going to do now is to create a parameter. Okay, make it null for now. We're going to create a constructor. So to create a constructor, you need the name of the class. You put this, and then you can now do this, which is the class this dot dog real name, and close it. All right, that's pretty much it. Just the same thing that we did for functions, where we were able to create named parameter, we can also do the same named parameter too for dogs. So if you hover on it, you can see you can put dog real name, but when you're doing that, make sure you use your required for it. Okay, that means it's going to show you error. That means this is required. So just use the same knowledge or the same approach that we use for function into classes. You're going to understand it better. Dog real name, we can just pass Lila, you need to pass the name, dog rename. So I'm using a named constructor, just the same way we created positioner and named parameters for function. The same thing that we can do for classes too. We can create positioner and named constructor for classes as well. So that's pretty much it. We have our dog rename, we have our dog instance and all that. Okay. Once we run this Lila, it's not going to show this thing because we did not use this dog rename anywhere. So what I can do now, instead of using this, I can say a dog, my dog. Okay, let's just say dog rename can walk. So it can just be like Lila can walk and all that. So let's run it. Because we have initialized it initially, you can now see Lila can walk as the name of the dog. All right. Classes is not that big deal like that. Okay, just make sure you practice, work around it. If you have any question too, my Telegram is available, and also put it in the comment section or the chat section. Right, just drop your messages. I'm going to respond to you. Okay. All right, so the next thing we want to look at now is the final thing on our list, which is exception handling. We are going to talk about try catch and handling errors. Remember, exception is something that we cannot escape from when building mobile apps, right? Any kind of app at all or software. One way or the other, you will encounter network error, you will encounter some kind of errors that are unexpected. If you're using an API, the API can return errors to you, and you need to know how to handle those errors effectively. All right. So we have our exception. Right? Am I spelling that correctly? Handling. Yeah. Okay. First, let's use our try and catch, our void main method here. So in order to work with exceptions now, let's assume we have a list. Let me grab this collection here. Let's say we have a list, all right? And this list it only has one element which starts with 0 index, right? Which is 0 index, okay? So if I try to do this, let's say print list of name, and then I access one index. Remember, this does not have one. If I run it, watch what will happen here. It's just going to print out this error for us. If you run this thing in your app, it might crash your app, right? Because you did not handle the exception very well. To be safe, what you can do, right? Most times when you're using all these social media apps or any apps, if you notice when you access them without internet connection, especially the apps that works with internet connection, if you access them without internet connection, you're going to get an error, right? And that error is, hey, there's no internet connection and all that, so it's going to show you another page where you need to just to update you. That's what exception handling helps us to do. Okay, all those things that they are doing there is more like a way of handling exception. So exception works with try catch block, and there's an optional one which is finally. So this finally is only used when, regardless of what the try and catch block executes, the finally will always get called. All right. So let's say we have our try block here. Then here you can have your catch and exception and this. So let me explain this for you. Let me run your code here. Catch the exception and show error to users. So what is happening here is try, you first of all run whatever you want to run, something that you know that it might cause error. Okay, you just have to run it inside your try block. So the catch exception, once the compiler catches any error, it's going to throw it back to this guy, this catch block. So this catch block now is now going to print out the error for you. Hey, I got a new error for you to investigate. All right, then you can now use something like this and say passing the error, because the error will mostly come from this e dot, just call it a string. Okay, so whatever the error is going to be returned here, just like this error here. Okay, so let's run this now. You will notice it did not show us this error anymore. Right, now we are able to handle it our own way by showing it to user. We formatted it and showed it to user our own way. So what is happening here is telling us, hey, I got a new error for you to investigate. Range error, which is this is going to tell us the details of the error. Invalid value, only valid value is 0. Like the only valid value here is 0. If we run this 0 now, it's not going to catch that error for us. It's just going to throw the correct value that is supposed to be returned, right? So that's it for try and catch. Then we have the finally block. This finally, I told you, regardless of what the error is, if it's an error or if it's successful or if it's an error, it's always going to return something for us. So you can just say, got it. Ended. Let's just say ended, all right? And run it. Once it catches the error, what happens? It shows us the error, and then finally it returns ended. So this finally, you should know what to do about this. If there's any error, you can run any method that doesn't depend on whatever you're trying to get from here. All right. Or let's say you're showing a loader. Once everything evaluates to true or false, you just run and show the loader, okay, to the user. If this is not an error as well, we can also get the ended is still going to show. All right, so there are also a lot of ways to handle error. So let's say here now, this is not based on error. Now I want to throw something, I want to like handle the error program. I'm just like the one causing this error now, so I can just so throw causing a new error. All right, so what happens, we are going to try and throw. This throw is just me handling the error. Okay, I just want to crash the app myself. And you will see that once this thing gets caught, I throw it, this catch block is going to handle it. So let's run it. You can see, hey, I got a new error for you. So you can see now this message is showing I'm causing a new error. So this is more like me, sending an error back to you. There's a lot of things you can do. There are also some different types of exceptions. We have on platform exception, you can catch. I don't know if this is going to be available here. I think we need to import that.io, but I'm not sure. Let me see. Okay, it did not work. But platform exception, especially when you're working with Flutter, right? You're going to see a lot of caption platform exception that you work with. So you can use it to handle Firebase exception, caption exception. Don't worry, once we get into Flutter, I'm going to show you guys all of this, okay? Through example projects and all that. You also have another thing again called timeout exception. So we use timeout exception mostly. What happened here? We use timeout exception when we want to. All right, I don't understand why this is showing. Okay, this isn't. We also have, just know that we have timeout exception. That is when there's an internet connection, it's going to time out. We also have a lot of exceptions. And also, if we try to do division by 0, in some programming language, it's going to bring 0. And dividing something by 0, it cannot go. So you are expected to get an error when you do something like that. So let's say we do print 5 divided by 0, right? Infinity, right? It's not, though this one did not show error, but in some cases you will see error, all right, when you try to do something like that. let's say 5 divided by 0. Let me just run it directly and see. I want to get a division by 0 exception. Okay, did not throw it. But most times when you try division by 0, you get this division by 0 exception in most programming languages. So if you ask me, this is pretty much all that you need to know to get started with that, with when it comes to exception handling. You have your try block where you run your try, catch, all those stuffs, and you have this, and you also have this. And yeah, I know I did not talk about future functions, async await functions when I was talking about functions. Okay, those are more like when you want to run a synchronous calls and all that. I'm going to talk about them when we get to Flutter, when we start making API requests and all that. Okay, so just the class is getting excited. It's going to get so much. I'm going to give you guys a lot of things. All right, you're just getting started. I've not really shown you guys anything yet. Yeah, so we're just getting started. So far we have been able to cover control flows. We have been able to cover loops, for while, do while loops, collections, functions, the different types of functions, their parameters, different types of parameters, return types, different types of return types, and arrow functions. We're also being able to cover classes, their constructor and return type. We are also being able to cover exception handling, try catch, and I also showed you how to handle exception properly by formatting the message and all that. So guys, this is going to be the end of today's section. I'm glad that you were able to stay tuned to this very end. Okay, so just let me know, type MVP in the comment box or the reply section, and yeah, and if you have any questions, do not forget, don't fail to let me know. Try as much as possible to practice what we have learned so far, starting from the first live section to this very one. Okay, so I'll see you all in the our Q&A section, which is tomorrow. Yeah, on the 8th of February, we are going to be having that on our Telegram live stream. So make sure you join the Telegram channel, and also do not forget to subscribe to this channel, because more amazing content will be dropping, and yeah, and amazing sections too will be dropping. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you in our next live stream, which is going to be next week. All right.